Okay, hi, good morning everyone, and welcome to the first of what we hope will be many webinars hosted here at Synextra. Thank you so much for attending today. Hopefully we'll have some really interesting things to talk about. So my name is Sarah and I'm a marketing exec here at Synextra, and I'm here with Chris Piggott, who is our CEO and technical expert. And Chris is going to be talking to us today about how ransomware has been evolving over the past few years and what kind of trends we have to look forward to in the future, as well as what you can do to protect your business. So I will say that we do have a few questions lined up at the end that people have very kindly sent in, and we do have the Q&A feature enabled. So if you come up with any questions at all as we're going along, if you could just pop them in the Q&A box and we will get through those towards the end. So yeah, let's get going.
So I'm sure probably most people attending know what ransomware is. But for those who don't, so ransomware is effectively, it's a piece of malware that gets into your network, typically through, well, there's a number of different sources, but mainly through sort of phishing emails. And the goal of the ransomware through sort of various mechanisms is to actually infect and encrypt your data and to demand a ransom, normally payable in some form of Bitcoin. And now that what we start to see is also, which we'll come on to, is that attackers are actually exfiltrating data out of the organization. And that's resulting in your files being taken out of the business and that being used as another way to drive that sort of ransom payment.
One thing I've noticed is we seem to be seeing it a lot more kind of reported in the news as well recently, these big attacks. It's something that I wasn't really aware of up until quite recently, but the kind of general media seems to be reporting on it. Yeah,
and I think it's one of these things that the more it's in the news, the more it will drive more attacks because the attackers feel like there's more chance of being successful. And I think that's, the advent of kind of people paying the ransom, that's just going to fuel more and more. And I think now that a lot of insurance policies, I know we'll come to this bit, but they will make available sort of ransomware funds to pay the actual ransom itself. I think this is just going to get more and more extreme in terms of what the actual ransom will do.
Okay, so in terms of the risks to a business that falls victim to a ransomware attack, what do you think are kind of the key areas?
So obviously, of course, there's the impact to the business itself through having devices offline, because once an attack is in your network, while they might only compromise one device, a lot of those threat actors are going to be looking to move laterally through the network and to actually offline all the devices, disable certain things. So you've got the risk of sort of loss of data because if you don't have appropriate backups in place and they crypto your backups, then you're not going to have access to that data anymore. Obviously, through the machines being offline, and if you're billing time-based, like if you're in the legal sector, or you need your employees to be working to be able to charge their time, then there's a financial loss. But of course, there's two sides to that coin, which is the financial loss itself is also affected by the reputational damage. Yeah. Because customers may refuse to work with you. You might not be able to onboard new clients because they say, well, you were ransomware previously, your data was exfiltrated, that contained personally identifiable information, and for that reason, we don't want to work with you. I think there's an interesting stat here as well, which is that, and this is from a leading managed security provider, that 70% of their customers were already found to have latent threats when they were onboarded. So when they actually took these customers on into their platform, they identified that about 70% of them already have pre-existing threats in their environment, which they had not detected or weren't aware of. And some of those could be things like ransomware that are sat in the background. So
you might think that you're safe and you're taking every precaution, but they might actually already be in your system.
Yeah, exactly. And that's sort of particularly now sort of ATP, this sort of advanced threat persistence. Attackers are looking to spend more time within a customer's network. And that is a serious risk.
I suppose it's easy to think in terms of risks when it comes to the financial loss, that the only thing would be kind of the payment of the ransom itself. And you might think, well, if I choose not to pay the ransom, then what risk is there? But as we said, we've got things like billable hours and then the reputational damage, which comes on later. So it can actually be a really long-standing effect on businesses.
Yeah, definitely.
Okey-doke. So if we talk about ransomware in 2021, how is it typically getting into people's systems?
Yeah, so the big one is it still continues to be phishing emails. And I think that's probably driven by the fact that they're getting more and more elaborate. These phishing emails, they look just like, I suspect there's probably a lot of IT people out there who still fall for these newer generation of phishing emails. Some of them are so well crafted, they look just like legitimate ones. So it might be things like fake invoices, you need to go online and view it, which is a lot of accounting people will fall for that type of scenario because they're so used to receiving invoices over email. Some of those, they might have to click on a link to go and download them. The more that they evolve, the harder they are to stop. So there is technology in the market that can help to sort of detect more advanced phishing emails, but ultimately it's just going to be user training. It's spotting things like the URL is different in the email. It's got poor grammar or an unusual tone of voice. The source email address is incorrect. Or just spotting little things on the website that you go to and looking out for things that don't look quite right. I think ultimately, like one of the big things is if you're not expecting the email, it's probably not legitimate. Then the other two that we see, so on batch devices, software that you've got on your device, whether that's something like Word or whether it's Adobe, Foxit, whatever it might be, Chrome, there's lots of vulnerabilities in typical software that's used in an environment. And actually what we see is that a lot of small organizations don't have the capacity to do patch management properly or vulnerability assessment. So that leads to a lot of vulnerabilities in standard pieces of software that are used in the environment. And I think this is a big one with, particularly with COVID and everyone working from home, unsecured devices. So we've seen a lot of BYOD use, so bringing your own device. And I think that sort of disparity between the internal IT department and those users working remotely, we've seen a lot of issues where actually people have got devices at home, they've perhaps even had to go and buy their own device for work, but the IT department hasn't been able to put their typical management tools on it. So things like antivirus or whatever that might be. And
a lot of that was driven by kind of the rush at the start of the pandemic when people were unexpectedly working remotely.
Yeah, that's it. We have to work from home. How do we do that in the shortest way possible? And sometimes, unfortunately, some of those controls had to kind of go out the window to accommodate that.
I know we said we would do questions at the end, but I actually have a couple of questions, if that's okay, about the phishing emails. So just out of interest, how often do you see that here at Synextra and what kind of things do you see?
Yeah, so we receive quite a lot of phishing attacks, but a lot of them get blocked. So we see a lot of, the really common one is that fake invoice.
Yeah.
It's an invoice that's attached to an email, but it's not actually attached. It's a link that says, click here to view the invoice online. And the grammar and tone of voice are all fairly typical from what you'd expect from an accounts department. We do block a lot of them, but some of them still get through, and that's where like user training or sort of AI-powered technology to actually spot spam or phishing email attempts is really important.
Have you noticed an increase of them?
Yeah, I think when we looked sort of over the last 6 months, there's been a marked increase in the amount of attempted sort of phishing attacks. And
just kind of out of interest from a user perspective, obviously I'm not a tech expert myself, at what point in a phishing email have you gone too far? Is it just opening the email that can let them in? Or?
Yeah, it tends to be when you click the link.
Okay.
So if you click the link, there's a chance that there could be some sort of JavaScript-based malware on the actual page you visit. But 9 times out of 10, they're going to be harvesting your credentials, or they might attach something to the email that has a macro embedded. But we see less of that now.
Cool. We've got quite an interesting stat on there as well, just for a little bit of perspective of how much ransomware and malware in general has increased over the past kind of 12 to 18 months. So from 2014 to 2019, they accounted for 13% of all cyber insurance claims. And in 2020, probably, as we've said, pandemic related, it jumped to 54% of all claims.
Yeah, I can believe it. And I think the thing as well with cyber insurance that a lot of businesses kind of forget about is that the sort of blanket policies that people like Hiscox provide don't cover a lot of phishing related or social engineering related payouts.
Is that because it's kind of almost user error in a way that they've clicked on things? Or?
Yeah, it's driven by the fact that it's super high risk. You know, that there's a very high likelihood within an organization that they will get phished or attacked. And that's why a lot of policies will exclude paying for that. So it's really important that businesses have a proper cyber indemnity, cyber insurance policy, because without that, then just not going to get the level of cover that is required in sort of a modern IT environment.
Yeah, awesome. So if we jump on to what we are calling the 3 tiers of threat, so the 3 kind of levels of ransomware at the moment.
Yeah. So we've got sort of three three tiers that we kind of classify ransomware as. So we've got standard, virulent, and sophisticated, human-powered. So your standard ransomware is kind of the sort of traditional mass approach from attackers. So it's, they've got a huge list of emails, they've crafted a landing page that looks like, say, for example, the Microsoft page or something else, or they've sent out a Word document with a macro embedded. And the reality is that some basic technology, things like Mimecast, anti-spam, or something like Proofpoint can block this. And then just good IT hygiene, so things like, again, sort of two-factor authentication. You're also looking at things around user training, perhaps a little bit of user training, not too much in this scenario. But the key thing here is these sort of standard pieces of malware that are really common, they're not doing anything too clever.
Right.
So what that means is really good backup policies, retaining data, having perhaps 2 copies of data. That's going to make sure that you're protected because you'll be able to restore your data.
What would you say is kind of the ideal kind of backup good practice for people to adopt?
So I think in modern environments now, that backup's got to be kept almost what we would say is off net. So it's keeping it away from your production environment, completely segmented, so that if an attacker is able to compromise your environment, they can actually, they can't get to your backup data. So you can keep it on a separate network, you can ship it off-site to a cloud-hosted service. You could also, and we don't see a lot of this, but VTL, so virtual tape library or tapes, they're quite popular because you can effectively make that data unable to be modified and protected. So you've got a known good backup copy that can't be altered. And that's, for this kind of threat, that's probably going to cover 99% of all attacks of this nature.
And would you say, moving back, maybe, 3 to 5 years ago, most kind of ransomware attacks were like this? Yeah,
it was just effectively a game of chance. And I think there's a bit of a saying, which is that, it takes a good defender to be right 100% of the time. It takes a good attacker to be right 1% of the time. And it's you've got to have all the steps in place to protect your network and all of your assets. And these are just some really simple things in terms of IT housekeeping can really stop a lot of people before they get in.
Awesome. So if we move on to what we're calling the virulent strain.
Yeah, so this is things like sort of ransomware as a service. Right. So DarkSide, Revel, Lockbit, that kind of thing. And a lot of those pieces of ransomware, they're relying on what we call sort of zero-day attacks. So they're things that antivirus won't detect. They're things that rely on known exploits in software that haven't been patched yet. They're perhaps things that have been patched, but actually organizations are slow to adopt patches for. So one example of this is the Exchange proxy vulnerability that came out recently. A lot of organizations who've been attacked with ransomware, that's been used as the mechanism for delivery. And actually, with those kind of environments and those kind of threat actors, your traditional setups, so just basic email filtering, basic user training, and basic antivirus, they're not going to stop those kind of threat actors. So you move to a slightly different solution where you have sort of more enhanced controls. So things such as zero trust, micro-segmentation.
What is zero trust, if I can jump in?
Zero trust. So this is you trust no piece of software on your network. So if, for example, you have something like Microsoft Word, Microsoft Word can be broken down into a hash, which we know that hash is a known good version of Microsoft Word. And actually, if someone was to put a fake or false version of Microsoft Word on your device that was actually malware, the hash wouldn't match, and so therefore wouldn't be allowed to run on your PC. So what we've actually got, a tool that we work with, is called Threat Locker, and that actually allows us to restrict what can run on the machine in terms of by hash or by path. It also allows us to restrict what IP addresses or machines on your network that can talk to you when it runs, because really, should Microsoft Word need to talk to an outside IP address? No, probably not. And we can actually restrict that. What we can also do is almost sandbox and containerize applications within a desktop or server. So we can say, actually, again, Microsoft Word, because it's a really common example of the way that attackers get in, we can say, don't allow Microsoft Word to call PowerShell, because that's a really common way of delivery. They'll call PowerShell. That will go and grab a piece of ransomware off some sort of repository online. and actually we can restrict that. And the same goes for PowerShell. We can actually restrict what IP addresses that can talk to, and again, that will limit the attack surface. So all of a sudden now, the kind of analogy I like to use is that if like antiviruses like the windows on a parked car, they deter threats, they stop people from breaking in to steal the vehicle. Almost like with Zero Trust, that's the immobilizer. That stops the vehicle from being driven away and being infected. And then we've got sort of microsegmentation, which I know you've heard about NSX.
Yes, I've heard people talking about NSX in the office.
Yeah, so that's effectively it's the ability to bubble machines and individually firewall them, so you can protect them from getting to any other device on the network. So in a traditional network, we'd have a firewall at the edge. So we'd have a firewall at the edge of the network protecting the traffic going inside and out. But actually with NSX, we're able to individually firewall each virtual machine.
So it's almost just putting like a force field around each.
Yeah, exactly. Like. Yeah, so it's a force field that we can control and allow only known good traffic. And that's the reason that's so important is it's because of lateral movement. So when an attacker compromises a server in your environment, they're looking to spread throughout the environment as easy as possible. So that microsegmentation is actually really making it a lot more difficult for them to do that.
And if you got a ransomware attack and they did manage to get into one machine, say, but you had this kind of protective bubble, is that then much easier to recover from?
Yeah, it should in theory limit the spread of the ransomware. It does depend on the complexity of the attacker and how sophisticated they are. But yes, it will significantly hamper their attempt to compromise your environment.
And slow them down so you can buy a little bit more time.
Yeah, we'd hope, and we'll come on to this, we'd hope that by that point, through slowing them down, you've had enough signals to know that actually you are probably compromised.
Okay, awesome. And then our final tier we're calling sophisticated human operated. Yeah,
so this is an emerging, growing area that we've seen. So it's ransomware that is operated by effectively an attacker behind the scenes. It's not something that's delivered automatically. So it can go into your organization through zero-day exploits, through emails or otherwise. It can go into your organization through individuals who've been bribed to actually, like, for example, like load a USB drive, load a piece of software, visit a particular URL. And that's really, it's a growing area. Like we've seen a number of companies recently who've been compromised. And they have been compromised by these sophisticated human-operated pieces of ransomware. And they'll do things like, for example, like with your backups. So they'll identify that you're using a product like Veeam. What they'll then do is they'll go and actually exclude directories. So as the IT department, you're getting notifications to say your backups are successful.
Yeah.
But actually, there's things that are excluded. So they might exclude, for example, the D drive where your application data lives. They might exclude the S drive where your SQL databases are, because they know that if they can do that, and in advance of actually activating the ransom and actually encrypting your data, there's way more likelihood that you'll pay the ransom because of the impact to your business. And there's actually, if you look at like the Colonial Pipeline attack that happened recently, it's not been officially confirmed, but it's believed they actually paid the ransom because it was so bad for them.
Yeah. So I suppose the kind of standard level, if you like, is like they're just trying to hit as many people as possible with really generic messaging, whereas something like the sophisticated level is kind of really bespoke and tailored to that particular organization. Yeah,
they'll know who can afford to pay the ransom and what they'll stand to gain, or more so what the company will stand to lose as a result of being offline.
And would they be able to kind of get assets offline from like a company's website or something to make it look really accurate?
So they might email into a sales email address and actually get someone to reply with the right email signature. They might go on the company website, actually find the people that work there, find their email addresses. They might try to bribe more junior employees, to help them and assist them get into the environment. But once they're in, and they can move through their techniques relatively undetected. And this is kind of what we talk about here, is there could be like 5 or 10 signals of things that have happened. So it could be that something ran here and communicated with an external IP address, which in itself isn't particularly a sign that you've been compromised. But if then they open PowerShell and basically try to gain persistence, or they run like Mimikatz and try to like capture like log on tickets on the network, then that might indicate that actually you are compromised. And it's tying all those tiny little pieces together and building the sort of the jigsaw puzzle and say, actually, yeah, there is likely an attack in progress.
And to kind of catch all of those things and view them together as a whole kind of holistic picture of the attack, if you like, really you need to kind of fight fire with fire and have human eyes on it.
Yeah, I think for this kind of this sort of threat, you really need eyes on 24/7. So that's, capturing the packets from your firewall, looking at, capturing everything that goes on the traffic. It's having agents on all the machines, capturing all the logs. Every single service that you have deployed in your environment, you need to be capturing the logs for and interrogating them with a SIEM solution that can correlate those events.
I know we've got some stuff on the screen about alert fatigue that we did a little bit of reading about. That said that 55% of businesses have ignored a known threat because they're just too busy, and 1 in 5 ignore alerts altogether because they just have so much other stuff going on.
And that's it. I mean, I know, and working in an IT department is extremely busy, and you're not going to have time if you're already under a significant workload to prioritise these cybersecurity events. And the thing is, it takes a particular set of skills to go and, review those events and actually carry out threat hunting. And not, most organisations can't afford to have a team like that in-house. Particularly
if it's, very small kind of signals, but together they form a big picture. Yeah. You might think you can ignore the little individual.
Yeah, what's that failed login attempt? That's nothing, but actually the failed login attempt plus the 2-factor push that someone accidentally accepted that originated in another country that shouldn't have done. It's those things that lead to compromise.
When we hear on the news about kind of, nation state sponsored attacks, is that kind of this level?
Yeah, and I think the thing is with nation state attacks, they are extremely hard to defend from, but it's only your largest organisations that are going to be, who are on a critical sector like power, nuclear, banking, insurance. Those are the kind of businesses that are targeted by nation states, but only the extremely large ones.
Cool. If we talk a little bit about how the threat landscape is changing, so we've covered on a couple of these points a little bit. So
there's a big one here for me, which is the off-the-shelf RMM tools being used. So an RMM is the tool that's used to manage the IT estate. So it's a piece of software that let you run commands on servers. It let you run things like Screen Connect to connect to devices remotely. And what we're seeing is actually a particular product, Atera, which has a free trial. I'm not sure they've actually stopped it now. A number of ransomware gangs are using the free trial to actually deploy this software. Now, of course, the challenge is that Atera it's a legitimate piece of software. So to a lot of organisations, it's very difficult to ascertain that actually, that could be illegitimate. But once they use that, they gain persistence. So persistence is they're able to just always exist within your network and get back in whenever they want to. So they'll deploy this and use it to scout your environment, deploy scripts. But what's particularly scary about this for organisations probably a little bit like us is that RMM tool can be used to spread across all of the customers inside that platform. So if you're an MSP, you're going to have pretty much probably all your clients inside that platform. And we've seen it recently with things like Kaseya, SolarWinds. If an attacker is able to compromise through the supply chain, those environments, they can potentially gain access to a large number of companies with very little aggro.
I think there's a really interesting stat on there that the average time attackers lie dormant in a system is 206 days. So why would they wait so long?
So I think a lot of this is driven by they need to get a foothold in the network. They need to look out for the right type of traffic so they can capture credentials for lateral movement. Once they're in the network, they want to make sure they kind of have the maximal damage that they can, because if you've got legitimate working backups, those threat actors are not going to succeed in you paying the ransom. So they'll stick around, they'll make sure that your VM backups or whatever it might be, whatever product you're using, that they're either excluded, encrypted or offline. They'll try to disable things like antivirus. So we have seen examples of attackers actually gaining access to the Sophos console and actually going in where 2-factor is not enabled, going and actually turning off Sophos before they carry out the attack. So this is the kind of thing that these gangs are doing.
I think a lot of companies think that by having, say, 90-day backups, that they're protecting themselves enough then. But when we see a stat like that, sometimes they're staying in for so much longer. Yeah,
you really need to have immutable backups that can't be altered. There's a number of different ways of doing that, one of which is sadly still is tape, because that can be completely offline and air-gapped.
And that's like literally tapes?
Yeah, like literally tapes.
Wow.
Yeah. So something we thought had gone away a long time ago. No. It's tape it's not something we actually use for any of our clients, but it's something that I think we might see popular because it can be completely air-gapped.
Yeah.
You can back up to tape, take it out of the drive, and literally no one can mess with that backup.
A couple of other things that we've got in terms of the changing landscape.
Yeah, so this is interesting. So kind of like to double down on their attacks. DarkSide have a Tor site, so where they actually announce the businesses that they've compromised. So effectively running their own PR campaign so that organizations can't hide away that they've been compromised.
Yeah.
So they'll actually publish on their site to say, yes, we've compromised this business and we've demanded they pay the ransom. So we've actually seen recently as well with some other attacks, like a countdown timer that's published on a website.
Wow.
Waiting for, and they've just said, well, we've demanded a $50 million bounty in Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And we've seen that like a lot more. And then of course the other bit to this is the CDN. So a lot of organizations will know that if data is actually exfiltrated, so of course this is a sort of emerging over the last 18 months where the ransomware actor, they know that you've got backups. So they'll find really important data on your environment and they'll ship that to themselves.
Right.
In the hope that they'll say, right, we'll actually put this public unless you pay us the ransom. So what they do is they know that if they put that on a public service like a Dropbox or something like that, the company that owns that data can actually issue a takedown request.
Yeah.
So Dropbox would actually close the account and that ransomware attack would no longer be affected, will no longer be effective. So what they've actually started doing is building their own CDN. So a CDN is effectively a collection of devices and servers that will serve content, so the downloads, and they'll actually upload those files that they've captured to that system and make sure that no one can take them down, which just basically gives them more credibility. And you know that if they steal your data, they will release it.
It's getting out there.
Yeah, it's getting out unless you pay it. And I think a lot of organizations, they have systems in place to understand the kind of data that has been released. And that's why we see a number of organizations that don't pay the ransom because they're confident that data doesn't contain PII.
Yeah. We've got on the screen there just some examples of recent attacks, the Accenture and Kaseya. Could you tell us a little bit about those?
Yeah, so Accenture, around 6 terabytes of data was actually exfiltrated, which is a lot. And the ransom was demanded at, I believe, $50 million. So they actually, we don't know if they've paid, but we suspect they haven't, because I think the threat actor tried to sort of say, well, we'll keep delaying the time when you can pay. Yeah. But I think Accenture held out and actually didn't pay the ransom. Yeah. Kaseya got hit. We don't know exactly who by. Well, I think there's some articles on it. And Kaseya is interesting. So their cloud service wasn't compromised, but they offlined it as a precaution. But Kaseya is an RMM, like we discussed. And actually, the on-premise version of that, there was a vulnerability through a supply chain exploit. So a supply chain exploit is, for example, like SolarWinds that happened recently. Someone left an FTP server open that contained some key binaries for the application. And the attacker was actually able to modify those binaries. They were still signed and they contained an exploit that allowed them to get in remotely. So again, that's kind of user error. Yeah, it's that 1% thing, it only takes an attacker to be right 1% of the time. Yeah. And actually they discovered these things on the SolarWinds FTP server. And I think the password was SolarWinds123. Oh, wow. Yeah, and they actually blamed it on a graduate, I think, or an intern, which is not really fair. But Kaseya, I don't think we know the full reason as to how that sort of happened. But that was a very similar type of attack. Okay, so if we move on to a kind of what level of ransomware should different businesses be protecting against? Yeah, so really everyone should have the standard protection level. So you've got things like Mimecast, you've got things like Ironscales, which does AI email sort of phishing detection. Would like Duo come under that? Yeah, Duo, so you've got things like MFA, just protecting your credentials. Those are really, and then I think as well in the standard, even just like basic user training. Yeah. Even if that's just as part of the HR induction, because it's so easy to be compromised these days through that. Yeah. And it's just teaching users that if you're not expecting this email and it looks even remotely suspicious, do not click it. Yeah. And then you've got your sort of virulent strains of ransomware. This is where you're talking about having next-gen antivirus. You're having your things like Threat Locker or Zero Trust microsegmentation. that's really going to help you be protected from those pieces of ransomware spreading through your environment.
And that's really if kind of reputation damage would be a killer for your business.
Yeah, and I think sadly this is a lot of businesses that really need to be considering themselves in that category, because more and more that the reputation is based on trust, and once that trust is lost, it's very hard to get it back.
You can't buy that back.
No, you can't, no.
And then the last one, the sophisticated human operated.
Yeah, so this is some of the technology employed here crosses over between sort of virulent and the sophisticated. So this is, what we add to this is effectively a SOC service, a managed security service, where you've got 24/7 eyes onto your network.
So that's avoiding that threat fatigue that we talked about.
Yeah, so it's having, constant risk management. So the CIS controls, for example, the first thing is scanning your network, understanding the risks. So the first thing we'll do is scan the network, maintain a list of all the assets, make sure that we've identified any improvements that need to be made to all of these sort of standard security policies, patching all of those assets to a certain level, and then getting agents on all the devices and basically monitoring all of the alerts so that if there is a compromise, you know about it before it's too late. Because the reality is with the sophisticated human operated stuff, once that ransomware kicks in, it's normally too late.
Yeah.
Because the damage is done, the data's been exfiltrated, they've probably managed to get to your backups, and you're going to be left in a very difficult situation.
You're going to find yourself in the papers.
Possibly, but more than likely, yeah.
Okay, well, I've definitely learned a lot. If I could move on to our kind of Q&A section. So a few people very kindly sent these in prior to today. So the first one I thought was really interesting. If you here at Synextra were subject to a ransomware attack, would you pay the ransom? And why or why not?
No, I don't think you should pay the ransom, but there are situations that, require that you do pay the ransom. There's no straight answer for this. I think it all comes down to the commercials of it. If you're a business, for example, like the Coin Pipeline, who perhaps say we're generating, $50 million a day of revenue, you might be in a position where actually you want to pay the ransom, because if the ransom's $50 million and you're losing $30 million a day, it's very easy to see commercially how you might pay that. Yeah. And there are some organisations with cybersecurity policies where the ransom will be paid by the insurance provider.
Okay.
Those types of policies are extremely expensive to have, but ultimately I think it comes down to the commercials of it.
Yeah. Okay, and the next one, how often do we see attempted ransomware attacks in the customers that we manage?
So I think we see a lot of phishing emails. There's no doubt about that. We probably get phishing emails sent to us to check over like every day or every few days. Yeah. And obviously if those customers didn't have the right controls in place, then that could lead to compromise. But it's definitely got worse in the last 6 months. And I don't think it's something sadly that's going away.
Yeah.
I think we'll probably see that the standard strains become a lot worse.
Yeah.
And that actually probably some of those even like lower grade pieces of ransomware may start to look to exfiltrate data out of the organisation, because it's the only way those people can guarantee the ransom being paid in more cases.
I suppose the longer it goes on, the more sophisticated the attackers get, the more personalised the attempts get. And
sadly, sort of two sides to the first question is that the more people that pay, the better funding they are given to go and recruit people, carry out training, develop new tools, etc.
And third question, do you think, well, you've actually answered this a little bit already, but maybe how do you think employees could be trained to look out for these kinds of emails? Yeah, so this is a bit of an absolute no-brainer as far as I'm concerned. Everyone needs to be trained. And I think it's got to be something that you do all the time. So at the very basic level, you can do this like once when someone's onboarded through HR, but I think you've got to do it at least every 2 to 3 months. Wow. Okay. I think it's not training alone, it's testing out that training's been effective. Yeah. So it's things like, sending in fake phishing emails. But they need to be really well crafted. They need to reflect the real risk that the business is going to receive. And actually, that's, I think it's just really important to test out that the training's been effective. And if it's not, get the right training in to help people, because that human firewall is the biggest component. Yeah. So if you could give people kind of one takeaway from this in terms of what they should look out for or what they should do or what products they should go for, what would you say? In terms of products or services, I think the strongest product on the market at the moment when it comes to more modern attack vectors is probably zero trust type products. Because the ability to control what can actually run, that even if something could get past the antivirus, that actually no other programs can run. I mean, it's not
it's not guaranteed, but I think it's going to get you to like 99% effectiveness with good antivirus and all the other basics in place.
Yeah, that hygiene and that training. And
yeah, definitely.
Wow. Okay. So if people want to know any more about specific products, they can get in touch with us here at Synextra and we can kind of design a solution that will fit them. I think we've got one question in the chat. So somebody's asked, do you think the threat of ransomware will continue to grow? So obviously we've seen it escalate a lot over the past kind of 18 months, but how do you see the future going?
Yeah, I think it will continue to grow because there are people paying the ransom, and that will continue to feed the idea that actually these criminals can continue to do that. I think it only takes a few high-profile cases where actually it gets publicised that someone's paid the ransom, and that could become a more acceptable norm. And we'll have to see what the insurance side does, whether they continue to support that or not.
It's a scary future.
It is, definitely.
That's why we've got to protect ourselves. Okay, I think that is all the questions. So I will say I will email slides out to everybody following this, and the recording will be available to download if you missed any of it. And feel free to get in touch with us, ask us any questions. We're always happy to help. And thank you very much for attending, and we hope to see you next time.
Yeah, thank you very much.